This podcast is sponsored by Insurity. Insurity are a national specialist insurance broker focusing on property insurance within the leasehold and private rental sectors. Their clients are central to all that they do, and they strive to raise awareness of changing insurance needs within the property sector. As partner to the Property Institute, Insurity continue to work closely with the Property Institute and its members in order to drive the property industry forward.
Before I begin today's episode, I want to inform you that this discussion includes topics related to coercive control and domestic abuse, which some listeners may find distressing or triggering. My conversation with Samantha Billingham involves personal experiences and insights into these serious issues. If you or someone you know is affected by these topics, we encourage you to prioritise your well-being and consider whether listening is right for you at this time. Please take care of yourself and remember that support is available if you need it. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Four Walls, where we delve into the issues that matter most within the property industry and beyond. Today, I'm honoured to have a truly inspiring guest, Samantha Billingham. Samantha is not only a survivor of coercive control and domestic abuse, but has also transformed her experiences into a powerful platform for advocacy. Her journey from victim to advocate is a testament to resilience and determination, and she now dedicates her life to supporting individuals who find themselves in similar circumstances. In this episode, Samantha will share her insights and personal story, providing a beacon of hope and a wealth of resources for those navigating the challenging terrain of domestic abuse. Her mission is not only to empower survivors to reclaim their lives, but also to deepen the understanding among professionals of the profound impact coercive control and domestic abuse can have. Whether you're a survivor seeking guidance or a professional looking to enhance your practice, this conversation promises to be enlightening and impactful. Welcome, Sam. Thank you so much for being here.
Wow, what a beautiful introduction. Thank you, and I'm really grateful to be here today. Thank you.
Of course. And if you're comfortable doing so, could you share a bit about your personal journey and what led you to become such an advocate for coercive control, domestic abuse awareness?
Yeah, absolutely. For those who don't know me, I'm Sam Billingham. I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. So we're going back 20 years or so now, so early 2000s, when probably like many other people, I didn't have a clue what domestic abuse was. I'd never heard it. I'd never seen any posters or anything to kind of raise awareness for what domestic abuse was. And it was a time when at school, sex education was just the bare minimum. We didn't know anything. So I was in my early 20s, and like any other Friday night, I went to my local pub. And I just met this guy, and it was one of those really cheesy moments where I looked across the crowded bar and I thought, wow, he's lovely. And that was the moment and the night that my life changed forever. I'd never met this person before. I didn't know him, never seen him in the pub before. Ended up going over to his table. He was there with his friend. Like we do, I introduced myself. I told him quite a lot about myself, where I worked, where I lived, how my social life was quite busy, and the relationship I had with my mom. I moved into his flat with him 2 weeks after meeting this person, which I now know is a massive, massive red flag. But he was so caring and charming, and he seemed really popular, and everyone kept coming over to me and they were saying, oh, he's a good one. He's a good lad. He'll look after you. You've got a real good one here. So with all these different people who didn't know me saying this, I was like, oh, he's a great guy. And as I say, I moved in 2 weeks after I met him, and everything just seemed okay, that there was no indication whatsoever for me to feel frightened of this person. There was no physical violence at the beginning. It was just really, really nice. It was just, he wanted to spend time with me. He spoke about my work and my friends, but then it was really, really subtle. It was really subtle. So it started with isolation, and it was something as simple as, don't go to see your mum tonight. Let's stay in, let's watch a film. If you love me, you won't go. And it was at the honeymoon period of the situation where everything is new and exciting, and you do want to spend all that time with that person. So I just thought, well, one night won't hurt. But then it became less and less when I saw my mum. Again, the same with friends. I remember getting dressed up one Friday night to go out with a girlfriend to a pub which was literally 10 minutes away. We shared a flat together. You could literally see the pub out of the window. I was just bombarded with so many phone calls and text messages and voicemails saying, "You've left me in on my own. Can't believe you've done this." He spoke about the way I was dressed. He said I looked like a not very nice person, and the only reason I was dressed like that was to draw attention to myself from other men. I hadn't even finished my first drink and I just went back home because it was just easier. And then he used to say something really odd, but I just brushed it under the carpet. He just used to say, "The only way you got your job as a legal secretary was by sleeping with your boss, because no one of your age would ever be able to get a job like that." And I really never thought anything of it until he locked me in the flat one morning as I was ready to go to work. And he locked me in the flat and threw my mobile phone out of the window. So we lived on the 7th floor, and he threw my phone out the window, so I couldn't even phone in to make an excuse. And 2 days later, when I managed to escape, the first place I went to was my workplace, because I felt the one person who could really, really understand me and who knows what kind of person I am is my boss. And I just remember going into work and I didn't even know what I was going to say, because at this point there was no physical violence whatsoever. So I've got no injuries to show my boss. I've got nothing really other than what I'm going to try and explain, which was really hard because I didn't have a clue what coercive control was then. I didn't know what he was doing was isolating me and gaslighting and love bombing. I didn't even know any of those words. And it was so hard and really embarrassing to try and explain to my boss what was happening behind closed doors. He just threw his arms up in the air. He said, "I'm not interested, you're sacked." So for me, that was the moment when you just took a really deep in breath. Yeah, I was instantly sacked. There was no questions. There was no, "Let's go and sit down, let's have a cup of tea." There was no, "Are you okay?" There was absolutely nothing. And all I can see is him throwing his arms up. "I don't want to hear, don't want to know, you're sacked." And because I'd been broken down psychologically at that point, I'd got no fight in me to say, well, actually, but for me, that was the moment when I actually lost Sam. I lost my sense of direction, my sense of purpose, my sense of belonging. I just lost everything. And that is when the coercive control increased significantly. So there might be some people listening saying, well, you could go and see your mum if you really wanted to. You could go out. And of course, I did those things. Of course I did. But there was always a consequence to pay. So for me, I was really close to my mum. We were more like best friends than mother and daughter. And I'd always have my phone on silent. My phone is always on silent, even 20 odd years down the line, it's always on silent. And he would time me when I went to the toilet. So he would look at his watch and go, "You've been texting your mum." He was right, I had. And one morning, early hours of the morning, I felt him get out of bed and you just assume your partner's going to the toilet. No, he was actually in the hallway outside the bedroom door. And I just remember reaching for my phone because I knew he was going to phone my phone. And it was on silent, so he couldn't hear it ring out loud. So he stormed into the bedroom, he picked me up, threw me across the bedroom, and again, my mobile phone out the window. And he was shouting and swearing at me, saying, "You've been phoning your mum again." So there was a consequence that I always had to pay every single time I saw my mum or she phoned, or I phoned her. She knew what was going on. She tried so hard, so did my dad and my brothers, to get me out of that situation. But with coercive control, it feels like care and as though they really love you. So you don't see anything wrong with what they're doing. So when people, friends, family, parents say, you know, he's not right for you or she's not right for you or this is happening, you generally don't see anything because you can't see anything or feel anything with coercive control. The same when I went out with friends. I went out again, a very local pub. When I got back, he would make me take my underwear off to smell, to see if I'd had sex with anybody whilst I'd been out. And I got another job, temporary. And again, I was sacked from that job because he just kept turning up to the workplace unannounced and it just kind of ruined everything. So when we talk about coercive control, it's actually about power and control to stop you from living. So I was existing in that situation for 3 years, and coercive control for me and many other survivors often tell me this as well, it's the most horrific form of abuse that any man, woman, child, anyone can ever experience, because it hurts you psychologically. And even though for me it's been almost 20 years since I've been out of that situation, it's just had a massive, massive impact on my life. And as you said in the intro, I've dedicated my life to raise an awareness for other people, because I didn't have that, and I didn't have anyone to support me. I didn't even have helpline number, had nothing whatsoever. So I just feel it's such an not an important topic, but it's important what I'm doing. And I know other people do this as well, but it's so important to keep having these conversations, because I can guarantee you there is someone right now who is in that situation, but they don't know because they don't understand what coercive control is. So if you follow me on social media, I'm always saying, if we're not talking about coercive control, we're not talking about domestic abuse, because we're really not. If I'd gone into that pub that night and he'd have punched me in the face, I would never have met him again, and life would have been very different. But because he was very charming and he was very nice to me, you go back. And I think that's why it's just so important to have these conversations. And I'm very lucky to have platforms like this to share my lived experience and to help raise that awareness.
I'm trying not to cry here, genuinely. I mean, how you even survive that and do what you do every day in order to, bring awareness of the situation. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That's just horrific.
I did see your reaction when I was speaking, and that is literally just the tip of the iceberg.
I'm
Obviously,
sure.
there's lots and lots of other things that have happened, but I just want people to really know about the coercive control. So I always kind of talk about that. There's obviously lots of other things that happened in that situation, but I'm not sorry it happened, because I wouldn't be able to do what I do today, and I wouldn't have met the people that I've met, and the survivors who trust in me and reach out to me every single day. So I believe that I was supposed to experience that to be able to do what I do today, and to have these conversations, and to hopefully in time create change.
Yeah. Going through what you did is obviously horrific. And, as you say, like a bit like myself, when, I've been through a lot of bullying and that sort of thing in my childhood. And it does make you the person that you are today because of various reasons. But, the fact that your boss sacked you, well, twice, you had that twice. Not only did they not have the empathy and the compassion for you, but they didn't even have the common sense to try and help you. I know that laws have changed around that now, and employers' responsibility is a lot different and a lot stronger now. But even just being a decent human being, that they couldn't even do that for you. That was where my in-breath came, of, oh
Yes.
my gosh, how did they get away with that?
It was, yeah, I do a lot of reflecting on my lived experience and things like that. And I often think that, I was always on time. I never ever had a day off. Even if I was ill, I would always go in work. So even for him to not just think, hang on a minute, that's really unusual. Sam's not in today. Obviously, I don't know if he tried my phone because it had been thrown out the window, but he didn't even say, I tried to phone you. Where were you? Why didn't you answer your phone? There was literally no conversation whatsoever. And I think what really hurt me was he just didn't want to even listen. I didn't even want him to do anything, because you can't. When somebody makes a disclosure, we don't want you to fix us or be our counsellor or do anything. We just want you, like you've just said, be a basic human being and just listen. That's all I wanted him to do. Just listen to what I've got to say, and then I'll crack on with my work. It's funny, but not funny. So the actual job, the job I got after that, was it again in a firm of solicitors, and it was a very small company. And I remember one day walking down the stairs, and I could hear this voice, and I was like, I recognize that voice. And he was sitting in the reception talking to the receptionist, and I just remember the receptionist going, "Oh, he's lovely, isn't he? He's come to pick you up from work." And I was just like, "Oh my God." And as I say, I was sacked from that job, but about 2 years ago, I was applying for jobs, and there was a part-time job at the very office that actually sacked me. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to apply for this job and just see what happens. And I actually got the job in that office, and I explained who I was, what I do now, and it was really weird because I could remember two of the ladies very, very vividly. They couldn't remember me, but it was kind of, I don't know, an achievement that I've kind of gone full circle. So I start when I was 18, 19, I was a legal secretary, and then I kind of finished admin assistant in that scenario as well. And it was only when I was working there that I thought, you know what, this isn't for me anymore. I'm not that person who always wanted this office job, who always wanted that career. My passion is doing exactly what I'm doing now. So I gave up that job to kind of throw myself into my advocacy work and lived experience, because I think it's needed now more than ever. Even though it's 20 years or so since my experience, I think we've still got a long way to go. But as you've just said about employers and employees, we have moved on. I'm now an ambassador for IDA, which is Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse, and they do amazing work, and they've got free resources on their website for employees and employers to understand how to respond and react when somebody makes a disclosure. So for me, that was the only disclosure I ever made, because I felt if my boss couldn't understand me, nobody else would. So I never ever opened up to any other professional after that, because I just felt, what's the point? No one's going to listen to me. No one's going to believe me. No one's going to help me. And that's what the perpetrator had always said to me. He always said, no one would believe me. No one would do anything. And in my mind, he was absolutely right, because that was the response and reaction that I was getting. So when people do make a disclosure, just at least have the decency to listen to them.
Yeah, it sounds awful that it had to be made into our legal system, or do you know what I'm saying? It had to be made that you have to do it for somebody to actually be compassionate about that and be a decent human, as I said. But, I completely, not from a domestic abuse situation, but going back to my bullying, it was so hard for me as well, because, I would say that this was happening and the teachers didn't help. And, my friends were great, but we were kids. What were they going to do? And the teachers, the adults, the grown-ups were supposed to help. And when I went to them, they either didn't believe me or just said, "Oh, you're being too sensitive, or you're this, or you're that," and blah 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 blah. So, as I said, it's not the same scenario, but I do understand. What is the point in telling anyone, because they're not going to believe you anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's even worse with bullying and coercive control, because sometimes you can't see any visible injuries. So when we talk about coercive control, it's really difficult for the person that you're speaking to understand. And I think it's hard for friends and family. You can't really disclose to them because they see it completely different anyway. But when it's really hard for you to understand yourself, I mean, I didn't realise how controlled I'd been until I actually came out of that situation, and I was given a questionnaire to look at. And I just remember looking at this questionnaire, and every question I ticked was yes. And it was just purely about control. There was nothing to do with physical violence. And I just remember breaking down in tears, because I genuinely didn't know how controlled I'd been, because I just assumed this is what happened in all relationships. So I didn't open up to anyone. I didn't, I thought, this is what happens, this is how it is, and that's it. It was only when I saw that questionnaire that I realised, hold on, how I was treated was just horrific. I had strict instructions never to answer the front door to anyone. And I remember his brother, who I used to go to school with, so I knew him before I got with the perpetrator. I remember opening the door, and he's all smiling, sort of ready to come in. And I'm like, no, I can't let you in. I'm really sorry, I can't let you in. But it's that fear of the perpetrator just knowing that something's gone on, knowing that I'd open that door and let his brother in. It's that fear of what would happen.
What if he finds out?
And if he finds
what's going to happen?
There is going to be a consequence. He'd only got to look at me in a certain way, and I knew that something would happen. So for me and many other people, coercive control, they don't even have to physically hurt you. It can be a look, it can be a glance, it can be a word, it can be something. And the fear that just rips through your body is just immense. It's massive. And that's why I talk a lot about coercive control.
And if you're comfortable sharing, how did you get out of this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was November 2006, and he'd split my lip open whilst I was holding our 10-month-old daughter in my arms. And for me, that was my wake-up call. I knew something I'd got to leave. He wouldn't change. So I'll just backtrack a little bit. I did end up having a baby with a perpetrator because I very naively believed that it would change him, because he said he loved me. He said it had never happened again. And you want to be that person to change them, and you want to be the reason that they change. He didn't. The coercive control and controlling behaviour was always right through the whole 3 years that we were together. But that is how I managed to get away. The only place I could ever go on my own was shopping. So I remember one Monday morning, I just got my daughter out of bed, just put her in the pram, and I said, "Oh, I'm going shopping now. Is there anything you want?" But I think he kind of knew that I wasn't really going shopping. And I just went to my local police station and I made a final statement. I'd made several statements prior to that, and I'd always withdrew them because he said he loved me. It never happened again. And I remember walking into the police station, and I remember the officer who was there, I actually knew him personally. We used to go to school together. And he just looked at me and he went, "You look like crap." But I knew where he was coming from, because he'd see me as that young legal secretary who was always, immaculate, who was always well turned out. And now I looked horrendous. Some days I wouldn't have a wash. Some days I wouldn't even brush my teeth. And I just remember him saying to me, "Are you ready to do it now?" That's all he said. And I was like, yeah. Made my statement. And on that afternoon, I instructed a local solicitor for something called a non-molestation order, which is an order to help keep the perpetrator away from you. However, the situation wasn't really explained to me. I didn't know that someone would come to your home and actually serve papers on the perpetrator. No one had explained that to me, even though they knew what situation I was in and they knew about the coercive control and everything. No one actually explained that. So when I got home, I remember it was a beautiful sunny day and there was a knock on the front door. I'm not allowed to answer the front door. I don't know that someone is coming to serve these papers. So he's upstairs looking out of the window, and it just happens to be a man who's standing at the front door. So he's now being verbally abusive. I can't open the door and the guy's gone. And it took about 2-3 weeks for them to actually find the perpetrator and serve those papers. And that was just, it was horrendous, because the impact that it left on me was just awful. So I was just a nervous wreck. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. If ever I saw him in the street, I would freeze. I would actually wee myself if I saw him. And there was a time when I was with my dad in a car, and I saw him. He didn't see us. He was actually going in a different direction. But just the thought of seeing him, my body just froze. And I was going to go into the shop, and I was like, I can't move. So the impact is really important to talk about, because I think sometimes society thinks that you're out of that situation and life goes back to normal. And if it only it was that easy, but the impact was just massive.
Truly, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. It just sounds so awful. But can you share how your experience of that has influenced your approach and your support for others? So what do you do now to help people?
I actually left in November 2006, and in May 2009, I set up an online support group called SODA, which stands for Survivors of Domestic Abuse. It's still running now, it's still very active. It's open to men and women all across the country who've experienced domestic abuse to come together without judgment. And I've been running that, as I say, since 2009. But it was only about 18 months ago when I gave up that part-time job to do what I do now, that I've become an advocate and spokesperson for people experiencing coercive control. So in November 2000, and I think it was 2003, I did my very first keynote speech, and I was speaking to over 300 social workers about my lived experience of domestic abuse and social services. That's something I've never ever spoken about before, because I think when we talk about social services, we feel that people might judge us because social services are involved in our situation. But this is what this conference was all about. So there I was on this massive stage with all these people looking at me, and I was talking about my experience. And what I spoke about most was how that social worker actually looked at me when I opened my front door to her, how I felt extremely judged as a parent rather than seen as a victim of domestic abuse.
Right.
And one of the questions after I'd actually done my speech was from she'd recently retired as a social worker, but her question was, if that social worker who'd come to your home had been domestic abuse trained, would it have made a difference? And I remember just looking at this woman, and I heard exactly what she said, but I just couldn't believe the question she was asking. And I just remember looking at everyone else and I said, can you repeat the question? And she asked me again, and I just said, I assumed all social workers were domestic abuse trained. And everyone's shaking their head at me saying, well, no. And I remember coming away from that thinking, I've got to find out. I've really, really got to find out if this is true, or is this just something that happens in this area? And I don't know why I did it, and I don't even know what I was expecting, but I messaged a journalist who'd spoken to me previously about my lived experience. And I went, I've been told this, and from my experience and from the work I do, this is happening. Can we find out? And the research that we did was with universities about student social workers, and it came to light that they don't get any training in coercive control. They don't really know what coercive control is. And I was like, well, how can these professionals who, go into this job for their own very personal reasons, how can they do that job if they're not, adequately trained? And then from that was August last year. From then, people, my inbox, my email, all my social media platforms, I've got men and women all across the country sharing their lived experience with me, and also telling me where the failings are in the system. And I'm one of these people who, I can't just keep this information to myself and just carry on. I've got to try and do something to create change. So I'm calling for mandatory coercive control awareness training for all professionals, because I believe if they haven't got that training, how can they possibly understand domestic abuse? Because coercive control is domestic abuse. It's all about that power and control. And I remember when I had my non-molestation order almost 20 odd years ago, he breached that order, which is very common for perpetrators to do. And I remember phoning the police, and the response was, yeah, but he hasn't hit you though, has he? And even now in 2025, I can tell you that is still the same attitude we have, and we have to work to change that, to shift that, because coercive control is a thread that runs through domestic abuse. But even though it's a law under the Serious Crime Act 2015, in my opinion, it's still not taken seriously. And if that's not taken seriously, how can we support the survivors? How can we support those people who are experiencing it? We can't. So they're being failed. Professionals are being failed as well, because they're not getting the training that they should be getting. So by having these conversations, and hopefully by the petition I've set up, that we can at least have a conversation with those in Parliament to say, this is what needs to be done and this is why.
Just, it's incredible what you're doing, Sam. It really is. And, you've got my full support. If there's anything I can ever do, please do shout. You talk about an ABC theory of coercive control. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how it can be applied in professional settings?
Absolutely. This is just, again, I do a lot of reflecting on my own lived experience. And I think in my situation, one of the things that people could have noticed and commented on was my appearance. So I often use a picture in my training. And if you follow me on social media, you've seen this image. I'm about 5 stone. All you can see is bones in my face. My wrists are horrible and skinny. And nobody ever commented on that. Nobody ever, are you okay? Is everything okay? Nobody ever said anything about that. And I've been thinking for a long time about ABC. And I remember one day I was a guest speaker online, and it just literally came out. And ABC is appearance, body language, and conversation. So my appearance changed dramatically. My body language was very negative. So I would never ever make eye contact with anybody. I would always look at the floor, because if I ever made eye contact with anyone, I was accused of having an affair. And my conversation, that changed. I didn't know how to speak to anyone. So it would be, yeah, okay. So it's just one word answers. We don't even have to talk about coercive control and domestic abuse to notice ABC. I spend a lot of time with my dad, and I'll go, are you okay? Because you notice something about them. So I think we are talking about coercive control, and the government want to put things in place, i.e. things like specialist support workers in emergency rooms in police stations, but we need to do something before we get to that, because people still don't understand coercive control. But the ABC, appearance, body language and conversation, is something we can all notice. Support worker, social worker, even a police officer, GP, we can all notice those things and piece together with a bigger picture. So for example, a social worker, one day, you're really jolly, but the next time your body language has changed. You're not really speaking. You're giving one word answers. You're not making eye contact. Piece it together with everything else that you've got. Could it be that they're experiencing coercive control? And it's something really easy to remember. It's easy as ABC. Just about being aware, and most importantly, are you okay? Follow it up. Nobody ever asked me that. You've got a legal secretary who's always in a suit, and then all of a sudden she looks as though, she's been living in a hedge for 5 years. Nobody ever said, are you okay? Or even, oh, you look different today. Nobody ever, because we don't know how to start those conversations.
No.
But to someone in that situation, are you okay, is massive, because the whole focus is on that person. It's not about, is everything okay at home? You're asking that person, and you're planting that seed of courage, because our ability to trust is just non-existent. We don't trust anyone. So professionals have a massive task of breaking through that and kind of encouraging us to open up. It's really, really difficult. But with the ABC, you're starting to, is everything okay? You look different today. Your hair's different. Or if it's a man, perhaps he was always clean shaven, but now he's got loads of stubble and he's got a beard. Oh, are you growing a beard? Or, it's something very, very simple, something very easy, and something we can put in everyday conversation.
I suppose it's difficult for people, or maybe like if a man said it to a woman, you don't want to make the wrong assumption, which then a woman may take the wrong way. And because I go through a lot of well-being training in the industry that I'm in, and you hear things like, oh, you can compliment people, but you don't have to compliment them on what they're wearing or something like that. So I guess it's just that hard balance at the moment, or the balance is quite hard to get. But as I said earlier, just having that compassion and empathy with somebody, like, for example, I've lost a lot of weight recently, intentionally, but a little bit of stress as well. And people do say, are you okay? Or, you've lost a lot of weight. Is everything all right? So, people do still still say it, which is great. But can you talk to me maybe about a success story that maybe has inspired your advocacy work, or somebody that you've worked with that you've managed to get out of a situation or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing this a long time, and I guess I do it because it needs to be done. I don't do it for praise or anything like that. I just do whatever I've got to do to help that person. And a few years back, I was invited to an event in Birmingham, and working in this arena, when you walk into a room, you're very familiar with certain faces, but you don't really know people. And it was lovely. It was a lovely atmosphere. And I just remember this woman coming up to me. So I'm sitting at like a big conference table. I'm sitting there, and this woman comes up to me, and she's all smiling, and I'm like, I don't know who she is. I don't know her name. Don't know anything about her. And she crouched down, so our eye level was the same. And she went, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I was like, "I'm so sorry, but I meet and speak to a lot of people. I'm so sorry. I don't know who you are." And she said, "I joined your SODA online support group five years ago, and you were the very, very first person that I ever made a disclosure to. And the advice that you gave me, I did exactly what you said, and I got away. I left." She went into, she got a child. She went into a refuge. She got a job in a healthy relationship. And it was at that moment I started to cry, because I really genuinely didn't know the impact that my work does have on people until that moment. So it was very emotional, but very heartwarming at the same time.
Yeah.
That clarification that actually, I am making a difference. I am helping. So for me, that was just amazing. And something else recently, it was a male survivor who had seen me on TV, and we ended up having a Zoom meeting, and he said to me, it's as though you're telling my story on my behalf. And it was just like, wow.
Wow.
That was just so powerful, because if like that for him, is it like it so that for me was like, wow. So yeah, but I'll do it because it needs to be done, and we've just got to do what we've got to do to help people in that situation. And for me, the reason is I want to be the support that I never had. I never had soda. I never had anyone say, are you okay? I never had anyone go on telly or podcast speaking on my behalf. So I just wanted to be, the support I never had. And from that, it's kind of grown, and I have so many conversations with people who trust me with their lived experience. I spend a lot of time on the phone with some, and you can tell it's the first time they've opened up because they're very emotional, they cry, and then you get some who are angry and who swear, and you just let them say what they've got to say, and then depending on obviously what support they're looking for, you signpost them to specialist services, and that's what it's about. There's no waiting list with the work that I do. If you want to get in touch, and I'll do my very best to support you as best I can.
That in itself is incredible, but also remember that every LinkedIn post that you make, or every social media post you make, every time you speak to somebody, you're helping somebody. Even if they don't reach out to you to tell you, just seeing that will spark something in somebody that, do you know what, actually I can do this, I can reach out for help, and actually what I'm going through can be resolved, and that sort of thing. So you're amazing. And I think that leads me on quite nicely actually about resources. And do you believe that there probably definitely aren't enough resources out there for people to reach out and get what they need, but what do you think is missing you can
Yeah,
help with?
there's some great resources out there for men and women. You've got the Paul Lavelle Foundation, you've got Women's Aid, you've got all Holly Gazzard Trust, you've got all lovely services out there which are fantastic for resources. So if you go onto their website, there's always useful resources on there explaining what coercive control is and domestic abuse. But for me, it's about that impact. So as a lived experience speaker, I can complement everything that's on that website, and I can bring to life what it actually feels like in that situation. And I think that is so important for everybody, professionals, for everyone to understand the impact of coercive control and domestic abuse, the reasons why we don't just leave. It's not because we can't, it's not because we don't want to, it's because we physically can't. So for me, it's about, bringing to life the impact. And I think as a lived experience speaker, that complements the work that these organisations are doing. I always speak from the heart, raw, honest, open, and I always end with question and answers, because I can share my little bit of experience, but if you've got a specific question that I've not covered, if you ask me, I've probably got an answer. So I do believe that sharing lived experience has a massive, massive impact. And this is why I want to work with professionals, and I do the work that I do, because you can have all the training in the world, which is brilliant, but unless you can really feel it and understand it, then you can't support these people, then you can't understand coercive control and its impact, because you're looking for the visible signs, whereas coercive control is all about the psychological impact and the psychological effect it has on you.
Yeah. The industry that I work in, which is block and estate management. So as an industry, we look after the building, not the individual flats themselves, but all sort of all the communal areas and that sort of thing. And I went on training once with, I think they were called Standing Together Against Domestic Abuse.
Yes.
And they were saying about, if you get a noise complaint, for example, is it a noise complaint? Is it somebody just being noisy for the sake of it? Or is there something going on behind the scenes? Is there a lot of arguments that you can hear? Is there a lot of banging doors? That sort of thing. And of course, noise complaints are frustrating for people. But actually, as a property manager, should we be looking a bit further? And is there something like with coercive control that you can give advice to property managers that they might notice things? You said about appearance and everything earlier in ABC, but is there anything in particular around, if we get any complaints like noise complaints?
I'm smiling and nodding because it's just taking me back to a situation I was in when I was existing in. So we lived in a block of flats. I think we lived on the 7th floor. So we've got people below us and people above us. One night he'd broke all the light bulbs in the house. He'd punch in the flat. He'd punched them all. So obviously there's noise, shattering glass. Most of the noise was me screaming or shouting or crying. And I remember one day we'd gone to, he was an alcoholic. So when I talk about pubs a lot, that's why. So we was in a pub, and the lady who was, I think she worked in the pub, she lived below us, and I remember her, she just looked at me, didn't say anything to him. She just looked at me and started to laugh, and she went, "Oh yeah, I heard you screaming and crying last night." And that was the end of the conversation. So she'd obviously heard banging or smashing of the glass before she heard me. She chose not to do anything. She chose not to report it anonymously to the police, perhaps. But she made a point of saying that to me in front of everyone in the pub, and she laughed. And it's like, really? And that situation stayed with me because quite a few years later, I remember it was a sunny day. I was living on my own, and I could hear a man, and he was screaming and shouting, help me, he's going to kill me." That's all I heard. And I just grabbed my phone and I phoned the police anonymously. I said, I don't want to give my number, but I explained exactly what I heard, and I told them I'm really worried. He sounds, distraught. He doesn't sound in a good place. And I'm so glad I did that, because an ambulance had to go and the police had to go. So if I had not done that, something awful could have happened to that person. And I don't think I would have been able to kind of have coped with that. So it's just those little things. Like you say, it's piecing it together. Yes, we have arguments. Yes, we make noises. I mean, my dad's neighbourhood, there's a young family, so you always hear the children crying.
Yeah.
But they're playing, you can hear them playing as well, and you can hear. So there's always noise like that. But if you hear smashing of light bulbs and then somebody screaming and somebody crying, you've got to have that curiosity. And there's nothing wrong with phoning the police anonymously to protect yourself and to protect the people you're raising that concern about. But to not do anything, I think, is the worst thing that we can do, because if we were in that situation, we would like someone to do that for us.
Yeah.
But it really is the ABC and listening and the professional curiosity is about piecing a massive puzzle together, because coercive control in domestic abuse is the most complex crime ever. So we understand that it's really difficult for bystanders to understand what's going on. But the more we have these conversations and use these platforms to talk about it, the more we can educate other people.
Definitely. And if you're okay to say, obviously, how do you cope with the emotional demands on yourself when you're talking about this and when you're helping people? How do you look after yourself?
That is something I've only just learned to do, I'll be really honest. When I first started, it was like, I've got to help everyone, I've got to save everyone, I've got to save the world. And I just did what I had to do. I've never had any triggers or anything when people are talking. You have to have that balance between professional and friends. But it's only recently that I've started doing a lot of self-care. So I do a lot of affirmations. I always say mediation. Is it mediation, meditation?
Meditation.
I always
Close.
say mediation. It's the work I do as well. So I always do that as well. And I do a lot of walking. I like to get out in nature. I'm very lucky. I live close to some fields, so I'll go across there and I'll just kind of relax. But it's only recently that I've learned to do that, and it's because of my experience of coercive control. So in that situation, I would always have to do everything straight away, like 100 miles an hour. And you think you still have to do that, even though you're out of that situation, you still think, oh God, I've got to do that straight away. So it's finding that balance. And it takes a long time, because I still didn't know who Sam was. And it's only within the last 6 months that I've really, really learned who Sam is now. I'd always put Soda in the work that I do before my daughter, before my family, whereas now it's taken a step back. I know I have to put myself first, and the focus is often on me. But it's a long journey from existing in that situation to being out of it, because every part of my life was controlled. So I didn't even know what my favourite colour was. I didn't even know what I liked doing anymore. So my dad would often ask, if I want to go for a coffee. So it's like, oh, yes, please, or no, thank you. And I'd always go, what do you want to do? And I didn't know that I was doing this until my dad went, every time I ask you that question, you always answer with that. And I didn't know. When he made it obvious to me, I knew why. It was because it was just easier to go along with whatever my dad wanted to, because that's what it was like in that situation. Well, now I can answer any question and make any decision, but he would have to wait a good 5-6 minutes for me to say, yeah, I want to go for a coffee, because the fear was still there. I wouldn't even buy any new clothes until recently, because the clothes that I chose to wear before, that was all, all you're only wearing that to draw attention to yourself. It's those words exist subconsciously in your mind, and it's really hard to get rid of them. I've only just started having my hair done, I've only just started socializing, and it's all because of the impact of coercive control, because it's the most fearful thing anyone can ever experience. And I always say I would have preferred to have had a beating every single day for 3 years than coercive control, because it's messed my head up a lot. I've had real breakdowns. I've had to go to talking therapies, I've had to have counselling, I haven't been the best mom, I haven't been the best daughter, and it's because of coercive control. And it's only now that I've realised that. So that's why I do a lot of work on myself and self-care, because no one can control me anymore. I am in control of myself. I control what I do. But it's taken 20 odd years to get to that point. So if anyone is listening, your healing journey is as unique as you are. You just take one step at a time to get to where you want to be, because what we've experienced, what we've survived is massive. It takes time, but there is absolutely life after domestic abuse.
It sounds like it took everything from you. How you've come through that, I'm getting emotional now. You're just incredible, Sam. Everything you do. And if there's anything else you want to say before we finish up?
Yeah, I would just like to say, if anyone is in that situation, the biggest key thing is it's not your fault. No matter what the perpetrator says, it's not because of something you said, something you did, or something you wore. Perpetrator chooses to abuse. Nobody chooses to be in that situation. So it's never your fault, and there is support out there. If you're a man, woman, there is support out there. There's websites out there that's got lots of useful information on. You're not on your own, and there is life after domestic abuse.
Thank you so much. How can people find you if they wish to do so?
I'm all over social media, so I'm on LinkedIn. Just type in Samantha Billingham and all my details will pop up. I'm on Facebook under Stronger Beginnings and Soda as well. I've got a website. Well, I've got 2 websites, but I'll give you the easier one. So it's www.soda, which is SODAHQ.UK. But anyone they think I can support them in any way, just find me on social media. I'm more than happy to help if I can.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my latest podcast. You can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram. The links are in the show notes. Or you can contact me on jodie@jodiefraser.com. For more content and updates, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your favourite platforms. Thank you once again for listening. Until next time, take care.